Hey guys, welcome back to Focused on Fins. So, the last time that we recorded this was on Christmas Eve, and we haven't been able to get back on the mic since then due to some scheduling conflicts. So, we are going to start working on a new time, trying to go 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. Today we are live on a Tuesday, but future weeks I think we're going to try to, go live on Wednesdays. So, keep an eye out for those. We are entering a dead part of the season for NFL teams. We're between the Super Bowl and getting into free agency and draft, but doesn't mean there's not a lot of stuff to still talk about. And it's also a good chance to kind of reset our mood around the Dolphins. This is the time of the year where there's almost nothing that the team can do to ruin your day, but this time is going to give us a chance to talk about the existing roster, some free agent strategies, and draft prospects. And we're going to try to touch on all of that at least somewhat today. But first, I want to welcome back my co host, Anthony Testino. And even though we haven't been live for over a month, Anthony and I have been talking almost daily. So I know he's been itching to get back on the camera and let people hear his opinions.
Yes, sir. How we doing?
Pretty good. As you know,
Cheers
right,
to
we're
Seattle.
going a little yeah, right? Thank God they prevented the Patriots from getting another one, and while I would have preferred a more competitive game, I'm not disappointed at all that they, you know, took it to the Patriots and just showed how far away they are from being the dynasty that they were.
Yeah, agreed. A lot of people that I talked to said it was boring, this and that. It wasn't boring for me. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching the struggle.
I had a lot of people saying the same thing to me about the Super Bowl being boring. And I get it in some ways. I really enjoyed the game, even that first half that was low scoring, because I felt that more than bad offense, I thought that was two very good defenses and two very good defensive coordinators that were limiting what the offenses could do. So from a schematic standpoint, I really enjoyed the way that both teams were attacking. So maybe it's just the coach and me, the trench play type stuff. But I enjoyed how close that game was early on, and that's uh, kind of where we're going to start our conversation today, because I think that every team across the NFL is doing what I'm about to ask you, Anthony. But when you see a team that wins the Super Bowl and a team that looks like it is built the right way to have sustained success, the question that comes to mind when you're comparing your team to the Seahawks is, how does where the Seahawks are today, which is obviously a Super Bowl champion, how does that compare to where the Dolphins are today? And what, just high level, what kind of stuff needs to happen for Miami to make those strides to have a chance to compete the way that the Seahawks are currently?
Oof. Um, a lot, I guess, in a way, is one answer. Um, but I think the recipe's kind of been proven over and over. I don't think it's any secret, and I don't think it's any secret to Miami. It's been the case for what, three out of the last four or five Super Bowls, that it's like the talk is the defensive line got after quarterback so and so, and that was what changed the game, right? When it was Mahomes running away from the Eagles, or it was what, out Tampa Bay chasing Mahomes, right? And then now you have this one where, I mean, Drake May was kind of running for his life, right? If you can get pressure with four, it's huge. And then if you have somebody on the back end that can, disguise coverages, call good defense, you have to have talent and players there as well to be able to do and play and mix up coverages. And then offensively, again, comes down to the trenches, running the football, not turning the ball over. You can obviously win. Look, another game manager won a Super Bowl, right? Doesn't mean, it's Sam Darnold doesn't run for 1,000 yards every year. Like, it's another just journeyman quarterback that really found a team, right? That's like the emphasis word there is they complement each other extremely well. They complement each other on offense. They complement each other on defense. And I'm talking about D line versus coverage and, pass game versus run game. And then you also have just offense and defense complementing each other, right? And that's what makes a good football team. And the reason why the Patriots are there is because they kind of buy into the same thing. It's second year quarterback. I don't think they really have the weapons on offense to particularly win one-on-ones the way they probably needed to. But again, I think that they're kind of down the same path, as much as I hate to admit that. They look like they know what they're doing as well too. But I think that's all right there for Miami, and I think that they have some pieces that you can start out with and chase that blueprint. And if you do it and do it well, I mean, there's no reason why you can't turn this thing around a hell of a lot quicker than some people think. I think it's possible, within the next couple of years to at least be competitive.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you're saying there. I do think that the Seahawks have built a model that is more prepared to win it again next year than what the Patriots have. I think there's a better chance the Seahawks make a deep run in 2026 than I do the Patriots. And a lot of that comes down to, like you said, the offensive weapons, but also the offensive line. Going into the Super Bowl, I had done a preview looking at both of those offensive lines, and that Patriots offensive line that got abused in the Super Bowl did not grade well in the AFC Championship game either. In my opinion, the Patriots kind of, when is Drake May went, right? Whereas the Seahawks on the other side, and don't overlook the luck aspect of it, right? Football, there is
Oh, I
luck
don't.
involved in football. There was several plays in that first half that Darnold was squeezing some passes in there, throwing some ill-advised passes. That game could have turned early. I actually felt like overall that Drake May played a better game than what Sam Darnold did, but I think that the Seahawks did a good job of being able to kind of take away what I view as Drake May's superpower. And when Drake May, in my opinion, has damaged defenses the most is when he has been able to climb the pocket through the middle. Like he's not the quick twitch, the scramble outside, the Jalen Hurts or Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson. But if you give him a straight line up the middle, he is very dangerous as a runner. And I think that entire game, he was only able to do that against the Seahawks once. And that comes down to, like you said, very complimentary defense, even in the way that they rushed the passer. It wasn't so much a cage type rush, but they did a really good job of the interior defensive guys getting vertical push on that pocket. And then the edge guys not getting too deep in their pass rushes and kind of countering inside. So it was almost like a twist, but not like an immediate twist. So I felt that very well coached teams on both sides, but I felt like the Seahawks just kind of had the horses a little more. But I think that it did show that you don't have to have an elite quarterback to do it. You don't need a Mahomes, you don't need a Brady, and there's not many of those. And Drake May showed that he's not that guy yet. Like he can raise the level around him, but he's not raising them to a Super Bowl team on his own. And neither is Sam Darnold. The difference was that the Seahawks had an offensive line, a running game that as that game wore on, they were able to take over the game. And at no point during that game did Sam Darnold need to do that. And I know that, the idea here is how long will it take the Dolphins to be competitive and using the same type of model. And I don't know that the Dolphins are that far off. And I feel like we've been saying that for a decade. It always feels like the Dolphins are close, and they kind of have been. Like they've been hovering around that 500 record, haven't been able to get through the first round of the playoffs. But this is not a team that is completely devoid of talent. And even the conversation around the volume of free agents the Dolphins have. I was looking on Spotrac this morning. I think the number is 34 free agents that the Dolphins have. But when you really dig into that list, you've got, I think it's 5 of them that are restricted free agents, which are Ethan Bonner, Julian Hill, Easy Obina, Cameron Good, Matthew Butler, right? So that's 5 guys off that list that would not cost much if you want to bring them back, and you have first rights on them. So you can bring any or all of those back. Of those 34 guys, you had 9 of them that I don't think played a single snap for the Dolphins in 2025. And then when you even look at the list beyond that, looking at the key players out of those 34 that played for the Dolphins in 2025, you're talking about Afatu Melifonwu, Larry Borum, Ashton Davis, Jake Bailey, Benito Jones, Darren Waller, Rasul Douglas, Dan Brunskill, Cole Strange, Greg Dulcich, Jack Jones, right? And there are some quality players in there, but there is not a single cornerstone type player in there. So even though there are a bunch of free agents, the Dolphins have a lot of bodies they need to replace on the roster. The core of this roster is still there. And I think there's a good opportunity to build on that. And that I don't like, obviously I can see a scenario where we have to, wait to see the results, but I don't think we have to go out there with a F them picks and try to sign big money free agents to get over the hump. I think there's a good core here that you can add some key pieces in the draft, some key pieces in free agency. And I'd be shocked to see them in the Super Bowl in 2026, but I would not be shocked if 2026 is another playoff year for the Dolphins. What do you think on that?
No, I think that was all very accurate. That is the biggest thing. Yeah, it's a lot of bodies, and Miami needs to, fill out their roster because, I'd have to look at the Seahawks roster and really see like where I thought it fell off, right? Is it the 41st guy where you're like, okay, that's the end. You know what I'm saying? Where I think for Miami, it's almost hard to gauge because they've had so many injuries over the last couple of years. It's like, some of the guys you had mentioned that didn't play any snaps. It's like, would they have, or they didn't because they were hurt, or is there no plan for them or whatnot? I agree with everything you said. I think if Miami can find some consistency at the quarterback position again, however they decide to do that, and if Sully lives up to the expectations of being, a good drafter and evaluator, you have 5 picks in the first 100 selections of this next draft. Then you have next year's draft class, which has been, hyped up beyond belief, right? So if there was ever a time that somebody wanted to go, and rebuild their team and establish a new core, this would be the time to do it between last year's class, this year's class, and then the following year's class. Like out of that, if you can end up with, I don't want to put a number on it because I don't know what the average is or what, that kind of thing. But the bottom line is if you can find some guys, some soldiers, some dudes that are going to carry out your mission, that are going to buy in, that are going to be team first, that love ball, and that can obviously play, like that's your core right there going forward, and we see young teams, have success all the time. It's just they have to play together. You need to have the right mixture of vets and coaching and people to buy in, and people got to stop caring about what they're doing after practice rather than being present at practice. They got to go the extra mile and want to win. And, I have more faith under this coaching, staff and this regime that's going to happen, or at least those are the expectations. And if they don't meet those, then you're out the door, and we'll find people that will, more so than I did under Mike, because I felt like it was just, hey, you're pretty good, so just show up on Sunday for me, And to me, it's not the kind of coach I am. It's not the kind of person I am. I definitely didn't appreciate it, that was kind of the label that our team got. So, as far yeah, bottom line is I'm right there with you. I think that I think obviously the next couple of drafts are crucial in rebuilding and kind of forming this new core. But if you can get a couple guys that are, your 5-star generals to lead this thing, absolutely, man. Just get everybody else to kind of follow suit, buy in, and say this is happening here, and yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, and I think that a big, I don't know, trend, topic, idea that I kind of got out of that is that you don't need you don't need the star players, right? Like you need some very good players. But touching on what you said there about the attitude of the players and the way the team carried themselves, like when Mike McDaniel was here, he very much wanted a player led locker room. Like he said that over and over again. He depended on these professional athletes to hold each other accountable, and it didn't work. Right? You had guys that were trying to do it, but then they're out here calling each other out in public, saying that they're lying to us about the culture and that type of thing. So it's refreshing to have an entire new front office staff here, right? New coach, new GM, where I think that they are going to be a lot more hard line on the idea that look, you either fall in line or you're going to be gone, right? We're not gonna put up with the crap. We're not going to deal with the being late to meetings, that kind of thing. But when we look at the Seahawks roster, there's not there's not a ton of star players there, and the ones that are stars are the homegrown ones. Like they're not going out there and finding these free agents, paying them top of the league money and depending on them to get them over the hump. It's really a group that is, you know, the sum of all parts is greater than the individual, whatever the hell that quote is. I'm butchering that, right? But even when you look at the
I got
offensive
you.
line, like outside of Gray Zabel, who was, kind of a draft, a hot name in the draft last year, there's not like a star on that group. Like Charles Cross is really good. Abraham Lucas is really good. Zabel had a good rookie season. Then you had Sundell, who was passable, I guess. And Anthony Bradford, I didn't think played very well at all. But that just goes to show that if you can get to that point where you have three good offensive linemen and you don't have anybody that is just awful, right? Then you can make it look really good. Like they did a solid job protecting Darnold. They did a good job. I mean, credit to Kenneth Walker for the way, very Le'Veon Bell type player there and the way that he was patient. But in order to do that, you have to have an offensive line that is able to sustain blocks, right? You don't do that with guys just getting free runs. And same deal defensively, right? You got guys that were drafted in Byron Murphy, Devin Witherspoon. I think, Eamon Worry obviously was. I think, was Julian Love drafted there? But,
Giants.
you get, what's that?
He was a Giant. They signed him in free agency, but he
Okay.
was not a huge name or anything either. He really blossomed in Seattle.
Right, and you add a couple other guys, the Leonard Williams, the Demarcus Lawrence, those type of players, and it wasn't just one player taking over the game. It was like it felt like waves of players that were just constantly coming after the Patriots. Want to give Dundee Dolphin a shout out. He's always in here. Appreciate you being here. If anybody else is watching and wants to ask any questions, and as always, you guys can feel free to do that, and we will try to get to them as well. So, like I said on the top, we are entering, kind of a dead part of the offseason in terms of transactions. Go ahead, Anthony.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if we were moving on there or not, but I did want to squeak one more thing in there just because I thought it was
Yeah.
interesting with, how we talked about, listen, if you're not doing your job, get out, right? You had Mike
Yep.
McDonald go through how many middle linebackers before he got what he was looking
Yep.
for when he got there, right? It was whoever, I don't remember who it was the first one, but I know it was Terrell Dodson, and then he was gone, and finally he traded for Ernest Jones, and that's been who he's stuck with. But obviously he had something in mind. He had a standard, and he didn't settle until he felt it was met. And also, I think the off season before that, when people were kind of actually no, apologize, it was this past off season, but trading Geno, trading away DK Metcalf. I mean, there's no doubt about it that you had people going, "What is going on? What are they doing? Are they going into a complete rebuild?" Right. So sometimes you do have to think outside the box, have a standard, have a very very detailed vision for what you want, and you cannot settle for anything less than that. And I just wanted to point out that I think that is a factor too. And a big credit to Mike McDonald and Schneider for doing doing it how they do it.
Absolutely. So looking at the calendar for the NFL, right? So we have February 17th. Let's start with that. That's the when the clubs have to designate franchise or transition players, and they have until March 3rd to do that. So what is that? Roughly a 3-week span that they have that they can do it. So just for the sake of uh, completion, is there anybody on the Dolphins roster that you're even considering for a franchise tag or even a transition tag?
No.
And so let's kind of rewind there a little bit. I talked about that list of key players from the Dolphins that are going to be free agents or are currently free agents. Was there anybody on that list? I know you're a big Rasul Douglas fan. From Is there anybody on that list that you feel is somebody the Dolphins have to bring back? And for me, as I go through that list, like it's a bunch of very replaceable names on the list. There's some guys that I would like to get back, but I think that of that list that I read off, probably the player that I would be most interested in bringing back is going to be Greg Dulcich. It was a midseason pickup last year, but he showed enough flash, upside. He had the draft pedigree as well and did some good things for the Dolphins. I think that's the type of high upside guy that I don't want to see leave the building. And and that kind of goes to the point of, even though we have all these free agents, right? For me, the most important one for me to bring back is a guy that we acquired mid-season last year. So is there anybody from that list that you feel like this is we got to bring him back? I'm going to be really pissed off if he's playing for somebody else next year.
No, I don't think so. Not 100% like I'm pounding the table to bring him back thing. I'm with you. I think Dulcich is probably the closest thing, and when it comes to like Rasul and Cater, I think it would be smart maybe to bring at least one guy back just to have some stability there. I've been having some conversations on Twitter, and the easiest way for me to explain it is just like, as a new coach, you have to be able to operate, right? Like you can't have a bunch of guys that are just all 24 years old, 25 years old, have never started, and are kind of all learning on the job. Like, somebody needs to be there to say, okay, I got it. And then when the coach walks away, I have a veteran that I know he knows what he's doing. I can watch the way he does it. He's locked, that kind of thing, So I think certain rooms, certain positions. No, again, I'm not screaming that they need to bring anybody back, but I do think that there are people that would be smart to bring back for those kinds of situations. But again, if they don't, I'm going to trust that they have a plan. The only other, like, I brought up those two guys, and then I would say honestly, like, Jake Bailey surprised the hell out of me last year. I really was looking forward to Ryan Stonehouse beating him out, and he did not.
Mhm.
And Jake Bailey had a phenomenal year, and I gave him a lot of crap the year before that. If they decided to do that, I wouldn't have any issues with that. And other than that, I don't think there was anything that anybody else. I like Willie Gay, but it's a different defense.
Mhm.
I don't, he didn't really play. I'd like to go younger at linebacker and really find, the guy that's going to be a good pair, a good fit for Brooks, but then also be there when Brooks gets old. So that's about it. But I'm right there with you. I think I would really like to bring Dolchich back.
And then also from Dundee here, right? He says, I believe that Matt Winston, the new head of college scouting, is known for evaluating character and professional habits,
That would be a good
allegedly.
thing.
Um,
Mm.
and I don't know anything about Matt Winston. I hope that is true. And I think that is important, uh, not only in a new coaching staff, but like let's not kid ourselves. Like Miami has distractions that other places don't have, right? So it's important everywhere to have high quality character players coming in, hard workers, that type of thing. But I think that when you're looking at it from a Miami perspective, that it's something that you really have to take into account, right? And we just saw it recently with, James Pierce over with the Falcons, right? Very, very talented player, but had some concerns in terms of character and staying out of trouble coming out of college. And had a pretty promising rookie season and completely probably derailed his entire career um, because of that off-field stuff. And when you come to Miami, there are plenty of opportunities for that type of stuff. So, hopefully Dundee's right and that Matt Winston is really, when you have your chart of what weighs the most, then character and professional habits are a huge part of that for whoever they bring into the Dolphins.
Yeah, totally agreed. It's been, a couple guys that have even mentioned it since they left, right? Deshaun Elliott was one that brought it up and said that it was an issue and Miami would never win because of everything that, is around and because guys end up kind of giving into it, right? And yeah, fine, let's go. I'll get 4 hours of sleep. Let's go party.
Right.
But that's also too why, I mentioned some of these veterans because some of these guys that are 32, 31 years old that have been there, done that, are probably settled down a little bit more, maybe married and whatnot, and or maybe just wanting to play because they love the game, or um, not that you'd be ring chasing in Miami, but that part of their career, whether it's Miami or other places, right? Like that's why some of those veterans can be really important for your team because again, sometimes it's kind of like yeah, do you really want to listen to your parents over and over, or you rather just yeah, I'm to death? But if somebody you respect, somebody cool, somebody that's like you, kind of takes you under their wing and teaches you the right way, maybe you're a little more inclined to be like, you know what, that dude was big for me, in a time for I was trying to figure out who I was, and a lot like people forget, these guys they're not all the same age. Some of these kids are 23 years old, 24 years old. And, yes, they're getting money a little bit earlier, with the NIL stuff. So like they're maybe maturing a little bit quicker financially because now they have it, right? As compared to getting their first check in the NFL and then being like, wow, what do I do with this? Again, if they get it a couple years early, maybe they get some of that out, of their system in college. And hopefully when they reach the pros, it's a little bit more of like, okay, that was fun, but let's go to work.
Yeah, and I think that's something that gets kind of forgotten that a lot of these guys are still kids. Like they are
The
fresh out
majority
of
are.
college. Yeah, like you're talking the majority of these guys are under 30, right? Still in the prime of their partying careers. And you'd like to think that they understand what they have, but a lot of them don't, right? And I think that a good example of that, it felt like there was like Will Campbell had an awful Super Bowl, right? An awful performance. And people have been talking about it for days. And there seemed to be a lot made of him not wanting to talk to the media after that, right? And I shared it on Facebook on my personal account, and I'm like, look, I don't have a problem with that. Like this kid, right, 22 years old, just played the worst game of his entire life, probably, right? And it was out there for the entire world to see, right? So I can completely understand why he wouldn't want to get out there in front of the media, because they were just going to ask him stupid questions, right? Like what went wrong? How do you fix it? Like you don't know that coming off that type of performance. But then today, Andrew Callahan on Twitter had tweeted this, and it said, unprompted, Will Campbell offered an apology for not talking to reporters after the Super Bowl. He thought he would say something regrettable. And the quote from Campbell was, when I get emotional, I tend to have no mind. And that's not the way I need to approach this thing. I know myself, and if I would have spoken after, I would have said something that I didn't need to say. Right. And that alone shows a lot of maturity for Campbell that not a lot of these guys have, right? It's a level of restraint. And I think that when we're talking about a lot of these guys that are 25 and under, and that's obviously just talking to the media and having the foresight to not do that, and probably had some, Mike Vrabel probably was in his corner for doing that. And not everybody has that. So I think that is a very important thing when we look at players that are coming here and we think about them, as human beings. But on to the next topic. I think this is one that you asked about on Twitter, Anthony, is when we're looking at the Dolphins roster, right? And this is going to kind of go into where asset allocation in terms of free agency and draft. Which side of the ball is further away for this team? Do they need more help on offense, in your opinion, or do they need more help on defense? I'm going to let you field that one first, and then I'll share my thoughts on it.
It's a fun conversation, which is why I brought it up. But I'll go defense, and I think it's because there's a lot of youth on that side, so there's a lot of question marks still. There's not as much, I think, that's set in stone, where I think on the offensive side, it's pretty clear that they need, couple things, but you know exactly what they are. And the other parts of the offense seem like they're at least, if there was a game tomorrow and, somebody blew a whistle, I think you could run an offense, not to say that you couldn't run a defense, but with all those free agents, and I'm not sure you could feel the defense, and then, again, Jeff Affley's taking over here. I think he's probably, getting antsy. He wants to wants to put his fingerprints on this team. I think you have to take a look at where, the weaknesses and strengths of free agency. And, again, Miami is in a difficult situation as far as cap, what they're going to be able to spend. And I think you and I agree that, if they get to $20-25 million in cap space, no, it's not a ton, but you can make it work. And then you can do restructure and other things as you go. If you need a couple more bucks here to do this and do that, so I don't think that they're going to be doing like nothing. But I don't think that they're going to be making very many splashes, and I don't think that they should either. I've seen people already talking about giving up picks for Max Crosby, and I honestly got nauseous. Like, yeah, I think I think if you can land a couple pieces on defense, I think you can have a pretty good unit, fairly quickly. I don't mean this year, but I think 27 is probably the year when you can maybe say like, okay, it's time to go here, and let's see this top 10 Jeff Affley style defense. I think it's going to take at least 2 off seasons to really build it and shape it the way he wants to. Where again, I think the offense is probably a little bit closer and only a few pieces away from being at least above average if they play to their to expectations.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like you were saying about the cap space that can be created, it's not going to be a ton of cap space, but you can do stuff in free agency still. Like when I just pulled up Jordan Brooks's contract, for example, and when he was signed, it was 3 years, 26 million. It was so that's a almost $9 million average. But his cap hit in the first year of that was 2.8 million, right? So if you clear $10 million in cap space, you can add three of those players, right? A Jordan Brooks, an Aaron Brewer, those types of players. So I don't think that the Dolphins have to be completely out on free agency. I just think they have to be smart in the way that they do that. And I will agree that I think that the defense needs more attention this offseason than what the offense does. Um, and my reason for that is that I think that, if you're looking to be competitive early, then I think that having a strong defense is going to be the way to do that, right? We just saw
Right.
Seattle do that with Sam Darnold, right? And the Dolphins, Jeff Hafley, John Eric Sullivan, they have talked about needing to get the quarterback position right. And long term, you want that to be an elite quarterback that can raise the level around him. But short term, you just got to find somebody that's not going to lose you games, right? And if you don't if you if you don't give up points, it's a lot easier to win games, right? It's a lot easier to build that strong defense that can hold a team to 10 or 13 points where you just need to get to 14 points to win a game than it is to build an offense that can consistently get you, 28, 30 points a game. So I think that, when we're trying to figure out how the Dolphins become competitive sooner rather than later, I think that there are very good pieces on defense. I think you continue to build that up, and you give the new head coach the pieces that he needs to try to build an elite defense. And even if that doesn't happen in 2026, right, then like you said, right, hopefully we're 2 years away if we add a few more pieces there on defense, they gel and they learn this defense, and hopefully we're talking about a dominant defense for 2027 where offensively, whether it is a quarterback that's on the roster, whether it is a rookie or a second year player at that point, whether it is a free agent journeyman, right? That we just got to find somebody that not necessarily needs to keep us in games, but can't take us out of games. So I agree that the defense is where we should see a lot of the help, particularly with on the draft side of things. And then trying to figure out these layouts still, right? Heading back to that calendar. So, as we talk about free agents, kind of hit on a little bit there in terms of what the Dolphins can do. Um, it, I don't really I haven't done a whole lot of work on free agents, but Anthony, I want to give you a chance. If there is anybody that you have looked at on the free agent market that you can say today that you would be really excited if they are Dolphins, is there anybody that really sticks out to you, especially the guys that are going to be in that Aaron Brewer, Jordan Brooks contract range?
The one that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and he's like, I believe I think it's an exclusive rights free agent, is Jake Tongas from the Niners, tight end.
Yep.
He was up there I think he was like 5th or 7th in blocking as far as PFF grade. Miami's obviously still in the market for a inline tight end that can do both, and I kind of like the idea of pairing him with Dolchich. I don't know I don't know. I can't remember exactly how those work. Like, I don't know if it's like just it's a 3rd round thing on them, or if they can choose what to put on them as far as like the tender, that kind of thing. I'd have to do a little more research into that. But again, he's one that keeps popping up just because the way I'm looking at it is, we're not chasing any of the big fish or the big whales, but if I have to spend $5 million, let's say, right, I know what the more expensive positions are in free agency, right? We had talked about how like wide receiver 3s, right, are making way too much money, right? But if I
I pulled up the exclusive rights free agent just to see what it was, and it says that it's a player with fewer than 3 accrued seasons and an expired contract. If their original team tenders a 1-year contract at the league minimum salary, the player cannot negotiate with other teams and must accept that or sit out. if not tendered, then they would become unrestricted free agents. So if Tongas is a exclusive rights free agent, then it's probably a very long shot that we're going to have an
Yeah.
opportunity for that.
Wow, that's depressing. Well, he was definitely one that I had on my list, but I'm glad you looked that up. I would have found that out myself and had my heart broken another time, but I'm glad for everybody,
Might as
that
well
got
do it
to see
live.
it. Exactly. And then I guess the pivot off of that would have been I've been a big fan of Isaiah Likely, even though I think he's a little bit more pricey. I don't know how accurate it is. I was thinking about even like um, just taking pictures or writing it down or whatnot to see how accurate it is year by year. But Spot Track has market values for players that are worthy of kind of discussing, right?
Yep.
And I believe for Isaiah Likely, it was in between 8 and 9 million. So big number. Like you said, if you could do that and maybe get him at 3.5 million for the first year, then okay, fine. Like that's you're still leaving yourself plenty of wiggle room for other things this offseason. But I was looking at it in the way of, if you were going to spend a couple bucks on somebody, like that's a starter that's going to play a lot of snaps and that's going to fill a very important and nice role for you as far as your inline blocking tight end, your every down tight end. And then Dulcich can kind of come in and be the Y, which I think is probably where he's better suited. But instead of spending 3 to 4 or $5 million on somebody that's your third corner or your second linebacker or your third defensive end or fourth defensive end, right? I was kind of looking at it like that, where I'd rather spend that money and get a starter. So I don't know. That was at least the direction I was looking. Again, I've kind of been all over the place between draft and free agency and trying to mix and match. So I can't say that I've honed in on too many other guys. I did put a couple guys on Twitter that I thought would be cheap. They're probably around the 26, 27, 28 age area. So maybe there's a chance that you catch lightning in a bottle and maybe you get the best 3 years of their career. The light bulb comes on, it's a great fit, whatever. But again, you're not doing anything to hurt your future cap, situation or really this year either. They also are kind of players where you wouldn't look at them and say, well, we don't necessarily need that in the draft anymore because we have De'Ami Brown, right? Like, so it's those kinds of things. So I'm really curious to see how they go about it and where they spend, their money. But I just think it's going to be more role player based if they could find a starter or two that are not 31 years old and maybe can build out a future here. I think that's awesome. Like you said, the best examples of that I think are Jordan Brooks and Aaron Brewer, right? Like you got them fairly cheap because Jordan Brooks had some injury issues and Seattle was kind of just done with it, I think. And then Aaron Brewer was kind of just we saw a lot of Tennessee fans I think complain about him, and say, oh, like, well, he wasn't a fit. That's why.
Right.
And if Miami can find, any of those kinds of situations and those deals, those players, I think that would be a home run for them.
Absolutely. So as we transition over into the draft part of it a little bit, right? A little bit of a disclaimer here for both Anthony and me, right? That we are still fairly early in our draft evaluations, right? I know that Anthony's been doing a lot of work with his rankings. Not sure if he's gonna have a big board or not. I have my own personal big board that I make every year. I feel pretty comfortable with where I am in the edge and the linebacker room. Have a few corners, few safeties, but have a lot of work to do at the other positions. So, the stuff that we're going to talk draft wise now, right, can we know can change over time. But one of the things that I've seen kind of floated out there is, basically because of how John Eric Sullivan has talked about the draft being, so key, and they've talked about the draft being the lifeblood of a team, right? There's been some discussion about should the Dolphins trade down in the first round and try to acquire a couple more picks. So my first question for you, draft wise is, are there, well, one, how do you feel about trading down? And then two, do you have a list of players that you can think of today that if they are sitting there at pick 11, that you're not trading down, that you're going up to the podium? And these can be guys that you don't expect to be there, right? The one for me on my board that really jumps out is Arvell Reese, right? If he, for me, if he falls to the Dolphins, I don't care what trades are out there. That's a guy that I'm going to go get, right? Do you have guys that you've looked at that you're like, yeah, I wouldn't even mess around trying to go down to pick 15. I'm going to stick and pick, and I'm confident in that guy.
Caleb Downs, I think, is, if he's there, I'm probably doing it. Ruben Bain, if he's there, I'm probably doing it. And then yeah, I think, most of the, any of the top like 3 or 4 guys that we continue to see recycled. I actually haven't really watched too much of Arvell Reese just because he's not really in Miami's, wheelhouse, right?
Yeah.
But I know you love him, and I hear nothing but good things about him, so you might as well throw him on the list. And then I think the other one that I've been really, really, warming up to is Francis Mauigoa. I would love to get him at right tackle. I'm not sure if they should move on from Austin Jackson before that, until, like, if they, right, we've talked about Austin Jackson, right? And we've talked about Larry Borum. We've talked about what to do with James Daniels, right? And what to do with the right side of the line. I'm not sure how much I would do before the draft, but I think if you hung on to those guys, let's say hypothetically, and then you ended up getting, Mauigoa, I would be fine moving on from Austin Jackson right then and there, maybe looking for a trade partner or something during the draft and just trying to recoup something, see if you can get anything. I like him, and obviously I would defer to you when it comes to the offensive line, but I like him a lot. And then I'm also thinking about just Austin Jackson, and I appreciate how good he is when he's at his best in the run game, but I'm also just imagining missing 9 games this year, and I'm just so tired of that. I really am. So, and again, watching Drake May run for his life and, all those things, it's like, just get me the offensive line. I'll gladly be patient and wait for the quarterback another year or two. You guys take your time, take your swings, find them. You'll find them eventually. I can even wait for a receiver. I can be patient until, for a star tight end, just get me somebody competent is what I'm asking for. But I want the offensive line to stop being an issue, and I think that's why, if he's there, I feel like that's as solid as a rock, right? At least that's what I'm envisioning. If we were to select him, is after that, you really look across the O line. You have your bookends, and then you have Brewer in the middle, and then you're kind of figuring out guard. But if you kept James Daniels or slid Austin inside, you'd have a pretty good one. And then it just comes down to the left guard, right? Or are they going to flip Jonah, right? But bottom line is that, like, getting the center and the bookends and feeling really, really good about those would make me feel really, really good. But I'm not opposed to trading down either, because I do it for fun in mock drafts. And I mean, if you pull the trigger on a trade and end up with, instead of 5 top 100 picks, and you can end up, getting 7, I mean, it is kind of wild what you can walk away with. And just then you start picturing and believing, like, this can happen quick, if these guys, and I'm right on 4 of these guys, right? And your first, second round picks, third round picks are a little easier to hit on than your 5th and 6th rounders, obviously, right? More talented. But yeah, the more cracks at it, fantastic. I also wouldn't be opposed to gathering more picks in next year's class, knowing how good that one is. But I do have a hard time believing that people and teams will give up next year assets for things in this draft.
Yeah, I think everything you talked about there is kind of part of the reason I try not to get too far down the rabbit hole of what I expect the Dolphins to do in this draft, just because of what you kind of talked about there. Like, if you bring back Austin Jackson, if you bring back James Daniels, if you re-sign Larry Borum, right, then the chances of you picking a tackle in the first round of the draft are probably pretty limited, right? But if we, as we get closer to that March 9th date is when the legal tampering period opens up, right? If you have released Austin Jackson, if you've released James Daniels, then yeah, that becomes a much more realistic option. Uh, Along the lines of trading down, another question for you, and this was another one that you had put on X, and you had asked if Miami were to not really address a position in free agent properly, which position would you prefer that they wait until the draft to double down on? And I know that a lot of people don't like this idea, but this is reality in the NFL, right? Especially in the state that the Dolphins roster is in. You are not going to be able to fill every single hole that you have before you get to the draft. And
Surprise,
going,
surprise.
you know, going in with a positional need, right? And depending on one pick to be able to do that is not a good way to do it, right? And that's kind of where the Dolphins ended up with the whole Chop Robinson thing. I feel like, and even Austin Jackson, like in both of those drafts, those were both first round picks that I think the Dolphins had several guys that were higher on their board at those positions than those guys. But in both of those drafts, there were runs on those positions. The Dolphins were kind of left with kind of last man standing there. And I feel like both of them were kind of overdrafted. Whereas last year, right, we saw the Dolphins had to do it, right? You knew going into the draft, the Dolphins had to do something at defensive tackle. And instead, they got in front of the run at defensive tackles because a bunch of them went off the board higher than what a lot of the projections said. They got Kenneth Grant, circled back, got Jordan Phillips, circled back again, got Zeke Biggers, right? So this isn't a unheard of thing, but I do think that it is a valuable conversation to have because there's going to be positions that you are more comfortable doing that and positions that you're not more as comfortable doing that. And for me, right, like I said, I'm still very early in my process, right? But linebacker would be one that I would not feel great doing that, right? I've got some
Correct.
first round guys on my board, right? Sonny Styles, I love Anthony Hill Jr., love CJ Allen. And I have a couple of guys that are a little bit below them, but then there's a big gap for me until we're getting into the round 3 and 4 guys. So that's not a position that and when I see a gap like that on my board, I feel like some of those guys are probably going to be drafted in round 2, right? I feel like they're going to be overdrafted based on what I have. So that's a position that, if we go into the draft and linebacker is a need, right? We haven't brought back Tyrell Dodson. We haven't brought back KJ Britt. Willie Gay's gone, right? And Jordan Brooks is standing there like Will Smith in, Fresh Prince, right? Then if Sonny Styles is on the board, I'm probably going to sit there. I'm probably going to pick that. Whereas, in the edge room, like I said, Arvell Reese is a guy that I would not move away from. But probably other than that, like, and this includes Ruben Bain for me. I love the depth of this edge group, and as I look at my board, right, there are consistently guys in every bucket there where I would I would feel comfortable with the idea of trading back a little bit and adding 2 or 3 edges to combine with, Bradley Chubb if he's still here, Chop Robinson, and feeling good about, if you get 2 or 3 of those guys, letting the cream rise to the top, let the competition sort it out, and feeling pretty good about one of these guys coming out and being a player that can contribute early on. So for you, Anthony, right? If there's a position they don't address in free agency the way that they didn't do defensive tackle last year, is there a position group that you are most comfortable with the Dolphins waiting until the draft and then, loading up with 2, 3, 4 guys and, letting the rookies battle it out?
Yeah, I think the first one for me is like secondary, and I've kind of grouped like corners and safeties together because of Halfley's defense and the way he plays it. Like, obviously you have to differentiate between the two, right? Only certain guys can play boundary. But once you get outside of those two boundary guys, everything inside of that becomes interchangeable. So it's almost like the two position groups are not so much corner and safety, it's boundary and everyone else, And I kind of like, again, I've been kind of vocal about that. I kind of like, what we have at least to start as far as like, I really want to find out about Jason Marshall, and I'm really excited that he's going to have a head coach that kind of his expertise is in, the secondary. I really hope Juju Brents is back and healthy. And I've mentioned that I went back and kind of read his draft profile, and some people had him pictured as a safety. To me, he's a little bit more of a zone guy too, but he's big. We've seen him move a little bit, right? It was limited snaps, but we know he can move, and he's an athlete, And I think that's a fun, thought and potential there that he could be possibly in that safety group and playing around the box and doing those kinds of things. Don't know that that's going to happen, but again, this is why it's exciting for me because I think there's more possibilities, and it's a more of an exciting, outlook and future than I think a lot of people are giving it credit for. They think they look at, like there's nothing there. Well, I don't see nothing there. I see the need for bodies. I do. But I am excited a little bit about, what they do have. But I think, when it comes to corner, like if they could get another boundary guy, and then I'd mentioned maybe bring back Rasul or bring in, one veteran, boundary guy, and then after that you have four guys there, right? So you're crossing your fingers that health and the injury bug doesn't get you twice, but then you got four guys there to play the boundary. And then, you have Minka who can play the safety spots, the box, the slot. And then if you draft another, if let's say you draft a more of a safety type, and then you draft a nickel slash safety type, right? Like then all of a sudden you have some kind of guys that you can play around with and move around and figure out where they fit. And to me, I think that would be good use of doubling or even tripling down on a position. I'm with you as far as linebacker. Listen, you really only start two. I mean, very little of the time are you playing three on the field. You have Jordan Brooks. Terrell Dodson is under contract. Like you could again, like if you rolled the ball out there tomorrow, like you have two starting linebackers. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think yeah, you don't double down there. You just you're either gonna live with Terrell Dodson for another year and maybe draft one later, or if you do decide to cut Terrell Dodson, save a few bucks, then yeah, I'm with you. Like draft one early and go to war with those two guys and fill in some depth behind it. But you don't need to be doubling down or tripling down or anything looking for one position, one guy, right? The secondary, again, I think you're looking for two or three guys that can, play some snaps. I think DN is another one because you have Chubb and Chop. There's a lot of unknown for each of they each have their own reasons for being unknowns, right? As far as the future goes, you're also going to be playing more of a 4-3 look, I think, right? So it's a little bit different. You're not playing quite the same defense. Hand's going to be in the dirt, so I think doubling and tripling down there. And we just saw Seattle the way they won. I think it's probably even smarter to double and triple down there. And then I think lastly, I'll just say guard. I think just because it's a lot of mediocrity, and there was a lot of guys that are just brought in to kind of keep the boat afloat, right? From sinking. And I think if you can go and get two guys there, I'd be happy with that. Maybe get a guy that you think can start in round three, or even round two, and then take another guy. Do what the way Detroit did it with when they needed a guard, right? Because who retired? It was who I'm talking about though, not Glasgow. Yeah, big
Ragnow.
name. Thank you. There you go. And that was Frank was a center, right? But they slid somebody in, then
Yep.
therefore they needed a guard. So they ended up going with Tate Ratledge, and then they ended up taking Miles Frazier, right? That's kind of what I'm talking about. It doesn't need to be top notch first round, but let's throw some legitimate prospects at it and make sure that we get it right. Well, in Miami, technically right now, you do kind of need two guards because there's a big question mark around Jonah, right? So it all depends on how much you need, I think, to sum up everything. But my main ones would be secondary, defensive end, and offensive line, preferably kind of leaning towards guard. Gets a little bit easier if you end up taking Maui Noah at 11.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I was thinking about as you were kind of talking through those positions is that I feel like it's a little easier. There's positions that it's easier to do that in, and positions where it is more challenging. And I would uh, not necessarily push back, right? But the argument that I would have against doing that at guard, right, would be that offensive line, quarterbacks, and like your boundary corners, those are pretty much 100% snap guys. So it's harder to figure out what you have there, right? Like if you draft a guard and you think he's ready, kind of like the Dolphins did, um, you kind of have to live with the consequences, and you don't have a chance to kind of cycle him in and figure it out. Whereas other positions like defensive tackle, right? When Kenneth Grant didn't bust onto the scene early, but Jordan Phillips was playing better, you could give Jordan Phillips a little more action early in the season without completely putting Kenneth Grant on the shelf, right? Whereas with Jonah, right, if you had decided that he was struggling, you had to do something else, you have to completely put him on the bench, and you don't rotate guards, right? So I do think that when we talk about that type of strategy, that there are certain positions that are easier to do that with, and I would like to see those be those positions that you can rotate players easier. So like you talked about, the interior secondary positions, safeties and slots, those type of thing, edges, defensive tackles, wide receivers. I think that those are the positions that I would like to see that strategy more out of. So last last topic that I have for today, I think this will be a fairly quick one. And it was just because I saw that I forget who even tweeted it out, but it was Spotrac had projection for Devon Achan for an extension. So Devon Achan is entering the last year of his rookie contract, entering year 4. And the projected contract, and you talked about this a little bit earlier about the projected contracts they have. So for Achan, they had an extension of 3 years, 36.73 million, and that's an average of 12 million a season. Um, and I'd have to work it up to see how that would affect his cap hit in 2026 if they were to do that, right? But just looking at those raw numbers, that average annual value over 3 years, is that something that, if the Dolphins extended Achan and the numbers were close to that, would you feel good about that contract?
Yeah, I think I would be fine with it. I think when I read it too, my initial reaction was like, that's not bad. Like where if it was maybe a bigger number, I probably would have said, oof, then you start questioning it a little bit, like, do we do that? But yeah, I think overall I was okay with that number. I think, Achan's our best weapon, our best offensive player. And there's no doubt about that. Again, I'm really curious about the offense, and Halfley kind of sounds more like a ground and pound, tough, no, hard nosed, right? Like get me 4 yards of carry kind of guy. When they went and spent money, granted now Halfley's not on the offensive side, but they went and got Jacobs, different style back than what Devon Achan is. So I just really wonder, how they envision him and what they plan on, how they plan on using him. And yeah, tricky. But money wise, I would be okay with it. I think that's kind of the going rate.
Yeah, and so here's where I am on that one. And I don't hate the number. I don't even hate the years, right? We talk about running backs having a shorter shelf life, but 3 more years isn't a huge commitment. But like you said, we don't like we think we know what Bobby Slowick is going to do, and it's probably going to be a little more inside zone and power than what Mike McDaniel did. And how how much does Devon Achan fit into that? So for me, when I look at that number, so roughly 12 million average, and then when I look at the franchise tag number for a running back being around 14 million, it brings me back to the Tua contract, right? Because there was a lot of people that wanted to see him play out that 5th year and possibly use that franchise tag if they had to. Um, and the Dolphins chose not to do that, and that's come back to kind of bite them in the rear end. So for me, when I look at that number, I don't hate the number, but if it were me and I was still unsure about what HN was going to be in this offense, then I would probably lean towards letting him play out this 4th year and knowing that I have that franchise tag in my back pocket. That's not really a whole lot more. And I mean, realistically, like even if HN goes out and has an even bigger year than he did in 2025, I don't see that number skyrocketing a whole lot more. Like I don't see that number jumping from 12 million to 18 million in one season. So I would still feel comfortable letting him play it out and using the franchise tag if it came to that.
Yeah, I would be fine with that. I think it's kind of one of those situations too where like you could even, as long as because sometimes what they'll say is like, okay, once the season starts, no more. But if it's not that, what you could also do too, is just let it run for 6 to 8 weeks. And if it looks good and he's fitting in well and he's running the ball well again, and it makes sense in the system, right? Then okay, cool. All of a sudden, week 10 rolls around and there it is, Devon Achan extension. I think that's also an option too. But I'm with you. I think where don't hate the number. It wasn't like, oh my goodness, we can't do that, can't pay that for a running back. But because of the question marks, surrounding the offense and Devon and his role and all that, I'm in no rush to do it either.
Absolutely. So, anything you want to hit on quick before we wrap this up today, Anthony?
No, I don't think so. Just really excited. 27 days until the NFL draw, no, until free agency. 72 until the draft. And but who's counting? Um, yeah, very very excited though, man. I think there's more that I like more than I thought I would when I started getting into it. As far as like the prospects in the secondary kind of and where I think Miami's needs are. I really only do the offseason stuff with Miami in mind. Anything else kind of, any other thoughts that happen are usually pretty organic. I won't do, 450 prospects because I'm a draft guru. I'm a Miami Dolphins fan. I only look at things through a Miami Dolphins lens. So, but I'm excited. I'm excited. I am. I'm very excited for this offseason. And, I do think Miami's not quite as far away, from being back and competitive and respectable, which is what we're all looking for.
Absolutely. And we will continue to dive into those free agents, into those draft picks a little more as we move closer to those dates. If you are watching, if you are listening, leave a comment below. Let us know, if there's specific things that you want to hear Anthony and I talk about. Like I said at the top, I think that going forward, we're probably going to be looking to go live on Wednesdays at 4:30. So, feel free to hop on, get in the chat, put your questions in there, and we will answer them live. But other than that, looking forward to hopefully being able to do this every week again with Anthony. And as always, stay focused on Fins.
Thanks, buddy. Oh, it's just me. Hi, guys.